The US President Joe Biden has signed into law the Compact of Free Association Agreements after a 5-month delay. The agreements passed the US Senate on Friday and has a combined dollar figure of $7.1 billion US dollars. The new agreements include an additional 20 years of funding at higher levels for the freely associated states of Marshall Islands, Palau and the Federated States of Micronesia. RNZ Pacific correspondent Giff Johnson says after months of dysfunction, US Congress finally figured out how to pass the compacts.
Now the funding that was agreed to for now through 2043 can actually be provided. The various services and money, and the money from the U.S. goes up significantly to all three freely associated states in this new compact funding agreement. And so next steps are each of the three islands has to approve the compact. And the president's office issued a statement yesterday saying that the Niti Jela, the parliament here, would soon be reviewing a resolution to endorse the compact. That would be coming up soon. Apparently, the FSM president, Semina, is to be in Washington soon, maybe the end of the month, something like that, and we'll sign off on some documents that will allow the compact to be implemented. So things are moving.
Okay, and just to passing the Senate, as we spoke about, that took 5 months longer than what people would have wanted it to take. In that delay, do you think there was any damage done by the US in regards to its relationship with the rest of the Pacific?
If you look at what the leaders said publicly, I mean, they wrote letters to the U.S. Congress. President Heine, President Semina, President Whips from Palau, they all wrote really strongly worded letters about how this was impacting their countries. Number one, not being able to move into the higher funding that was promised because the Congress hadn't approved the New Deal. And secondly, that it increased the potential for activity related to China. And, particularly for Palau and the Marshall Islands, they're Taiwan connected, right? Diplomatic relations with Taiwan. So that's still a big issue for them. And, did it do long-term damage? That's hard to say. But it just, it shows that I think in a certain way that the negotiations were done. Everybody signed it back in, last year. And then there was just this lull and they were kind of backburnered for a while. And sorry to say, but that's pretty typical of the way Washington often has treated the Pacific Islands.
Just going back to China and what those leaders were saying about China, do you think there was any real risk of those leaders moving closer towards China? Because that's what it almost sounded like in those letters.
I think Palau may have a bigger issue because of its tourism industry. And there's a lot of Chinese investment in hotels. And in the past, they've had a very significant impact on the Palau tourism industry through tourists. China cut that off a few years ago to try to force Palau to change to diplomatically recognized China. I mean, it just hammered their economy because it was like overnight China turned off 50% of their tourism industry. But the Palauan leaders said that isn't the way we do business and stuck with Taiwan. But so there's more, I think, of an issue. Marshall Islands it has small scale Chinese investment and whatnot, but we don't have a tourism industry to speak of. So from China's point of view, I suppose the real pressure point here is the ship registry, which is the third largest in the world and flags a lot of oil tankers. And who's the largest consumer of fuel in the world? Well, China. So China can do things to any of the fleets that are flying Marshall Islands flags, put them at the end of the line, charge them more, things like that. So, there are things like this that happen out here. But on the ground, I doubt this will have much impact on the ground here in the Marshall Islands. I mean, it's been done now, right? So now it's just up to the Parliament here to decide what it wants to do and move forward.
Earlier on, you said the delay was quite typical of the US and how it treats the Pacific. What do you think the delay means for Pacific nations outside of the North Pacific? Do you think it could have any impact?
I think there's a couple of things here that are interesting when you think about the wider Pacific and U.S. promises about, like reestablishing its presence and delivering on things like it's back in the game the way it wasn't for a few years. And the problem is, number one, when people see this kind of a delay, they wonder, right? They wonder what the commitment is. Although, frankly, it's just the U.S. government system. It's not a parliament, and you've got to go through the different branches. But secondly, what I think may be a bigger issue for a lot of the Pacific area is the fact that the U.S. government has still not fully addressed the Marshall Islands nuclear testing legacy that it caused. And, around the Pacific, people are very aware, particularly leaders, but I'd say even, like people working in the NGO community, people all over, they're really aware that the Marshall Islands has had a terrible situation with these 67 nuclear tests and health problems and dislocations of people and can't go back to islands and, so on and so forth. And it's like, you go, well, the Marshall Islands and the freely associated states, they're the number one allies of the U.S. in the Pacific. And yet the U.S. government won't address the nuclear problems that it caused. I mean, yeah, it's doing a little. It's doing some things that are good, and that's fine, but it's not doing enough. And it did not take the opportunity of the third compact negotiation to do it. And so as a result, we have a compact that does not mention the word nuclear. And I'm sure that a lot of people around the Pacific just look at that and they can't understand it. I mean, this is America's best friend. So to me, that's really a bigger issue in the long run, because people in the region, for example, we had Secretary General Henry Puna from the Pacific Islands Forum here for March 1 last week, or 10 days ago now, the 70th anniversary of the Bravo hydrogen bomb test. And he came up and he was, he's very close to the issue. And, he sees it and people in the forum see it. So I just think it plays badly for the United States in the wider Pacific.